Donald Trump says inflation is at a perfect number. Do you agree?
Well, I think that no, I do not agree. It's not at a perfect number. We want to see inflation down to about 2%. And what today's PPI print showed us was that, everything we've been saying about how tariffs can cause rising prices is true. It's tricky because what's happening is the tariffs lead to higher prices for businesses that then have to decide how much they can absorb, and not just how much they can absorb right now, but for how long they can absorb it and what to pass along to whom. And so what we saw here was some pass along that has happened among producers. And the question will be, when does this pass along start to happen to consumers? It was always a pipe dream that tariffs wouldn't cause inflation. I think the most important thing to realize is tariffs will cause higher prices, but they don't have to cause ongoing inflation. So we got a jump up in prices. And the Fed has to figure out whether people can look through the increase in prices and realize, okay, we're going to move to a new equilibrium where everything's a bit more expensive and then stay there. Or will they start to get worried about ongoing inflation because people's inflation expectations have not been quite as well anchored in the post-COVID inflation era?
Well, when you combine some of the comments that we've heard from companies this earnings reporting season, Betsey, it sure makes you wonder. People not buying breakfast as often at Wendy's and McDonald's because they're not driving to work. In some cases, not working at all. Sweetgreen says they're not lining up for salads at lunchtime. But then you've got the Procter and Gamble's of the world that are passing on higher prices. And you've got the Black and Deckers who are trying to absorb it. They're all warning investors, though, that something is coming. And when you put that composite together here, what does it tell us about where we'll be, say, in the fall or winter?
Look, this is just, our bread and butter economics that you learn in an intro econ class, which is, if the input costs go up, if you're a business, you might sell less if you raise your prices. But if you don't raise your prices, you might not make enough profit to make it matter how much you're selling. So you have to figure out how much of the price increase do you pass on and what does that mean for how much you sell. And if you do that in an environment when consumers' incomes might be declining, or at least their willingness to spend is declining because of fear of rising unemployment or fewer job opportunities, that makes things even more complicated because you've got consumers' willingness to pay has gone down, and you have to navigate how much to pass on in that environment. It's not going to be static. It's something that is, every business out there is trying to live and learn, adjust their prices a little bit, see what happens, figure out how long they can hang on without raising their prices. The one thing I think I'll say for certain is companies don't like Procter & Gamble to announce an increase in prices and then say 6 months later, we're just kidding. Tariffs are gone. We didn't need that price increase. Sorry, we did that to you. It costs them too much in terms of loyalty. So companies are slow to pass along price increases. And I think we all need to keep that in mind.
Well, and it's something that we're going to be watching, obviously, here. We're watching it with every data point, Betsey. But how would you respond to the Peter Navarros of the world who say, no, you're wrong. Wages will keep up because of growth. That growth is the answer to all of this. And we heard that in the first term as well. In fact, they frequently point back to the first term as evidence to say you're not painting the complete picture here. You're going to see wages skyrocket because of reshoring. You're going to have growth that helps us get beyond higher prices. Bring me back to Econ 101 and the response to Peter Navarro.
That's a great question. So first we have to ask, where does economic growth come from? Economic growth basically comes from being more productive. So if we can produce more using the same amount of resources, we have economic growth. And one of the things that's true about tariffs is they lead us in the opposite direction, because what they do is they put a wedge between choosing what's optimal in terms of producing things at the lowest cost and what we end up doing, because now there's this wedge, the tariff, and might make it better to produce iPhones in the United States, even though they're very, very expensive to produce in the United States. So we go about doing that. We're going to have very, very expensive iPhones. That's not going to lead to economic growth, because phones are going to be more expensive. There's going to be something else we're not doing with our resources, which might have been something we were producing for export that we were actually quite good at doing. So I think this question is, they say economic growth, but you have to actually say where the economic growth is coming from. Now, one thing they are telling us is, that one big beautiful bill had a bunch of incentives in there to try to get, increase maybe capital investment, invest in research and new ideas. And so they're hoping that spurs some growth. I don't know that there's a lot of evidence that the problem businesses had was that, they didn't have, strong enough tax write-offs to be able to do new ventures. So I'm not convinced we're going to see a lot of economic growth out of that. And then there's something else, which is one of the things that's going to hurt economic growth, besides the tariffs, which will hurt economic growth, is growing government debt. Growing government debt means if you're a saver, should you loan your money to the government or a business? Now you've got, government in there competing in the market for loanable funds with businesses. That's going to drive up the cost of borrowing. And I think that's another reason why, the research shows you drive up the cost of borrowing and you're going to slow economic growth. So I just don't see this evidence for faster growth.